Take the two top tanks as an example. The Iraqi T-72 is about 40 tons in weight, compared to 65 tons for the M1 Abrams. The M1 Abrams tank is heavier than the T-72 due to its thicker armor and larger interior, which allows more ammunition to be carried. This overhead view of the turrets of the T-72 and the M1 show the real difference. The M1 turret is wider and larger due to its thick layer of advanced laminate armor. The frontal armor of the M1A1 will stop nearly any existing anti-tank missile or projectile. Another difference is that the T-72 has a three-man crew compared to the four in the M1 Abrams, since the T-72 has an auto-loader instead of a human loader. The interior of the M1 tank is more spacious than the T-72, making it more suitable for prolonged combat operations in difficult desert conditions. Most Iraqi T-72s are older models, which do not have advanced laminate armor in the turret, so they are more vulnerable to many types of anti-tank missiles and larger tank guns. Although the basic gun performance of the T-72 and the M1 is very similar, the Abrams has distinct accuracy advantages due to superior gunfire controls. The T-72 can only fire from the halt or while moving at very slow speeds.
Fire control system is excellent. Shooting on the move is better than the 60. The faster the tank goes, the more stabilized the gun is. And you can smack targets. You can ask my gunner. He can hit targets moving at 30, 35 miles an hour without a problem.
One of the unique advantages of the more advanced tanks of the multinational forces is their thermal night sights, a far more versatile sighting system than the types employed on Iraqi tanks. These sights can also be used during the daytime to see through smoke that would blind Iraqi tanks. The Iraqi tank force is not as experienced as other branches of the Iraqi army. Its performance during the Iran-Iraq War was lackluster.
Because of the fact that the Iraqis did not face a serious armored threat, there really was not the need for them to develop the kinds of equipment and the kinds of tactics and capabilities that they would have needed if they were fighting somebody with a real armored force. I mean, if there's a war between the U.S. and Iraq, the U.S. is going to have real armored forces, and they're going to have no experience in dealing with those kinds of forces. So I think this really reflects one of the disadvantageous results of their experience in the war with Iran. If you're just going up against infantry, even a T-55 is fine.
The Iraqi tanks look very good on paper. If you take a look at the key characteristics of main battle tanks, the gun performance, the thickness of the armor, the mobility of the tank, the Iraqi tanks seem to stack up pretty well against American or British or French tanks. But you have to take a look a little bit deeper than that. For example, the issue of the durability of the vehicle. The Iraqi tanks, mostly coming from the Soviet Union or China, are relatively inexpensive tanks that aren't very durable. As an example, the gun barrel on a Soviet or an Iraqi T-72 tank is good for about 100, 120 rounds before it gets worn out. Now, on a comparable tank, an American or a British or European tank, the barrels tend to last 500 rounds, 1,000 rounds. That wouldn't seem to make much difference in battle, but it has a lot to do with training. It means that the Iraqis can't train with their tanks as much as the Americans or the British or the French because their barrels run out, their tracks eventually wear out, the engines wear out. So as a result, the Iraqis don't train as hard, they don't train as often, they don't train as long as the tankers on the other side of the potential battle. What this means is that the Iraqi tankers have less skill in many of the basic combat skills, such as the accuracy of their fire. Another factor to keep in mind also is that many of the Iraqi tanks are very heavily worn out from the last Gulf War, from the Iran-Iraq War, which lasted almost a decade. So I don't think that we should be misled by the simple numbers, by the fact the Iraqis have more tanks. The bottom line is that numbers alone don't tell the whole story, that there's other factors that certainly have to be kept in mind.